Designed by Gary Anderson and entered by Jordan Grand Prix into the 1991 Formula 1 season, the Jordan 191 was not the most remarkable of Formula 1 cars. Powered by a Ford HbA4 V8 engine, the 191 was relegated to never being more than a midfield car. But it was a solid midfield car, as it would score 13 points across the season and managed to finish 5th in the Constructors' Championship. Not a bad result in their debut season. Even though all of its points would be scored in the span of just 5 races by full-time driver Andrea de Cesaris and Bertrand Gachot, the car is remembered for other things instead. It is widely recognised as one of the most attractive Formula 1 cars ever built, but it has become inextricably linked for the debut of a certain German driver at the Belgian Grand Prix. After Gachot was arrested for attacking a London taxi driver, a replacement was needed. Gachot would be replaced at the Belgian Grand Prix by highly rated sports car driver Michael Schumacher, who proceeded to mark his only appearance with the team in sensational style by qualifying 7th on the grid, out-qualifying the seasoned de Cesaris. Schumacher's racing debut would be short-lived, however, as within the first mile of the Grand Prix his clutch would fail just after Eau Rouge, but he had made enough of an impression to be snapped up for the following Grand Prix by Benetton, making his Jordan career barely a mile long. The rest of the 191's season was unremarkable, with 7th being the best position scored after the Hungarian Grand Prix. As for Jordan Grand Prix itself, it would go on to survive another 14 years, with the 1999 season being its best, but by the time it was bought out by the Midland Group in 2006, it was a shell of its former self. After 2 years under Midland and Spiker, the team would be bought out by Indian businessman Vijay Mallya to become Force India. Competing in the 2010 Formula 1 season, the Force India VJM-03 would make significant progress over its direct predecessor. Although it wouldn't go on to score a pole position or a podium like the VJM-02, the VJM-03 would be a far quicker car on average, scoring points far more regularly than its predecessor. Drivers Adrian Sutil and Vitantonio Liuzzi were often fighting the Mercedes and Renaults for the first half of the season, but the pace of the car gradually dropped off, despite upgrades that brought along a knockoff F-duct, as the team was not able to get these upgrades to work consistently. Therefore, Force India was more often fighting the Saubers and Williams towards the end of the season, and even struggled with some reliability issues as well. Despite this, the team would go on to have a good season, and they would finish 7th in the Constructors' Championship, with Liuzzi having his best season in Formula 1. Force India would be able to race in its home country for the first time in the 2011 season. Entering the VJM 04 into that season, the team would have a bit of a reversal of fortunes compared to its 2010 season. The season would start with the car not having a great deal of pace, with driver Paul di Resta suffering an 8-race pointless streak. But as the car received upgrades, it became quicker and more consistent, scoring points on a more regular basis. The car would go on to have a best finish of 6th at any of the Grand Prix that season, twice at the hands of Sutil and once at the hands of di Resta. The team would find themselves battling for 5th in the Constructors towards the end of the season, but ultimately they fell short by just 4 points, finishing 6th in the Constructors as a result. The 2012 season was a very competitive one for Force India, as it was for every other team on the grid that year. The VJM 05 would be driven by Paul di Resta and Nico Hülkenberg, who would replace Adrian Sutil owing to his assault charges. The VJM 05 would go on to score fairly regularly, but the car was somewhat inconsistent. It might finish 4th on one occasion and then finish outside of the points the next. Speaking of 4th place, that was the best position it could achieve in any Grand Prix, once at the hands of Hülkenberg in Belgium and the next at the hands of di Resta in Singapore. The car was rarely above midfield pace, but it did have a small chance of winning at the season finale in Brazil, where Nico Hülkenberg actually led the race for about 10 laps. Hülkenberg was looking extremely strong in that race, until he came undone on lap 54, sliding into Lewis Hamilton and leaving the Brit with race-ending suspension damage. The incident earned Hülkenberg a drive-through penalty, which ultimately dropped him down to 5th place at the flag. As for Force India's season as a whole, it proved to be one with very little reliability issues, with all but one of the car's retirements coming at the hands of collisions. The VJM 05 proved to be a far better car than its predecessor, and it would pick up 109 points across the season, but it would only finish 7th in the Constructors' Championship, as 7 of the 12 teams on the grid would score more than 100 points. Adrian Sutil would return to Force India to drive the VJM 06 in the 2013 season, whilst Hulkenberg went to Sauber for a single season. The VJM06 was a thoroughly unremarkable car, as whilst it would be a fairly solid midfield car for the first half of the season, its pace would drop off dramatically after the British Grand Prix, and it would seldom score points after that. Di Resta would take the car to its best finish of 4th place at the 4th round in Bahrain, whilst the returning Sutil could only manage 5th a few rounds later. Perhaps the highlight of the team's season would come at their home race in India, as whilst they wouldn't score particularly highly, it would be the only double points finish that the team would achieve at the Indian Grand Prix, as this would be that race's last year. Force India would score 77 points in 2013, enough to finish 6th place, and 20 points ahead of Sauber. Driven by the returning Nico Hulkenberg and Sergio Perez, the VJM07 would compete in the 2014 Formula 1 season, powered by a Mercedes hybrid engine. This would be the team's most successful season to date, as whilst they still only finished 6th in the Constructors, they scored the most points in their history, with 155. They would have a season-long battle for 5th in the Constructors with McLaren, though ultimately they fell short. The team took home their largest points haul in a single race in their entire history at the Bahrain Grand Prix, when Hulkenberg finished 5th and Perez took home the team's first podium since 2009, with 3rd place. The feat could have been repeated at the Canadian Grand Prix had Perez not been involved in a late race crash with the Williams of Felipe Massa. Otherwise, the team had rock-solid reliability, scoring points in all but 2 races. Force India introduced the VJM08 at the 3rd pre-season test of the 2015 season. The delay was due to the team switching wind tunnels to the Toyota facility in Germany, and as such the initial A-spec variant of the VJM08 suffered quite a lot. Hulkenberg and Perez struggled to get the car into the points consistently, something that changed when the B-spec variant of the car was introduced at the British Grand Prix. The B-spec would score far more consistently and regularly, almost always finishing in the points. It would even pick up a podium at the Russian Grand Prix, though only after the Williams of Bottas and the Ferrari of Raikkonen came together. Although Force India would not score as many points as the previous year, they would still finish 5th in the Constructors, thanks to the McLaren-Honda debacle. The team was starting to gain a bit of a reputation for creating decent and solid cars under a shoestring budget. The VJM09 of 2016 may have looked a lot like its predecessor, but its performances were far above that of the VJM08. Although the first rounds of its season were not particularly great, only scoring 14 points in the first 5 rounds, the team would bounce back at the Monaco Grand Prix with 6th place for Hülkenberg and a sensational 3rd place for Perez, the first time that the team had ever scored a podium in Monaco, even since the Jordan days. A second 3rd place would follow at the European Grand Prix in Azerbaijan, making this the first time that the Force India team had ever scored 2 podiums in a single season. After the Hungarian Grand Prix, the team would achieve double points finishes on all but 2 occasions, and the team would easily take 4th place in the Constructors, defeating Williams to take the highest ever finishing position in their history. It was truly remarkable what the team could do whilst operating on such a small budget. Originally painted silver, the VJM10 would be repainted pink in accordance with title sponsors BWT's wishes. The car would be driven by the retained Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon, who would replace Nico Hülkenberg, who departed the team for Renault. The car would go on to become an incredibly consistent point scorer, scoring points in all but 1 Grand Prix. Although this would be the first Force India to fail to score a podium since 2013, it still managed to pick up good results across the season, and once again the team would finish 4th in the Constructors' Championship. There was some trouble brewing, however, as the team's drivers had a bit of an intra-team rivalry, coming together at the Azerbaijan and Belgian Grand Prix and costing them double points results. And then there was the team's financial situation, as team owner Vijay Mallya was a wanted man in his home country, and as his supply of cash dried up, the team was starting to feel the pinch. Force India would enter the VJM11 into the 2018 season, a year that would end up being a rather tumultuous one for the team. Retaining drivers Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon, the first 3 races of the season did not go well for Force India, only scoring a single point out of 6 finishes. That all changed at round 4 in Azerbaijan, however, as Perez was able to capitalise on the late race puncture of the Mercedes of Bottas and pick up a 3rd place. Unlike its predecessor, however, the VJM11 struggled with its pace and consistency for the entire season, and it would rarely reach the highs of the top 5 for the rest of the season. The pace of the car, however, were the least of Force India's worries, as Vijay Mallya could no longer afford to run the team owing to his numerous financial issues. As such, the team would enter administration prior to the Hungarian Grand Prix, with driver Sergio Perez being one of the creditors that sought the administration, his actions eventually helping to save the team from total collapse. Ahead of the Belgian Grand Prix weekend, the team would be bought by a consortium led by Canadian businessman Lawrence Stroll. or rather all of the assets of the team were purchased. The team itself remained in the hands of Vijay Mallya, and it was dissolved, technically bringing an end to the original team that began in 1991. In its place, the consortium created the new temporary Racing Point Force India team. But due to technically being an entirely new constructor, the team was forced to start the season from scratch, from 0 points. Although the final 9 rounds of the season went fairly well for the team, they only managed to pick up 52 points, enough to finish 7th in the Constructors. Had the points from before the administration been counted, the team would have finished with 111 points, enough to finish 5th, ahead of Haas and behind Renault. The Force India team had died, but a phoenix rose from the ashes, and its name was Racing Point. With the team now owned by Lawrence Stroll, Esteban Ocon would be dropped for the 2019 season, and Lawrence's son Lance would take his place instead, partnering Sergio Perez. Together they would drive the RP19, an underwhelming car that was more or less an evolution of the VJM11. The car lacked pace and consistency, rarely finishing above 6th place, firmly making it a lower midfield car. Upgrades, however, would improve the car's consistency, and Perez was able to finish in the points in 8 of the 9 rounds after the summer break. In the hands of Stroll, it was much less successful, as he would almost always finish outside of the points. The highlight of the team's season, however, came at the German Grand Prix, when Stroll found himself fighting for a podium, though ultimately would only finish 4th. That still contributed a fair portion of the team's 73 points and helped them to finish 7th in the Constructors' Championship. Racing Point unveiled the RP20 at pre-season testing in Barcelona, and immediately came under intense scrutiny for the car's close resemblance to the previous year's title-winning Mercedes W10, which ended up earning the car a few nicknames such as Pink Mercedes or Tracing Point, and some of this scrutiny was well founded, as the rear brake ducts of the car were found to be far too similar in design to the W10, which copped the team a 15-point penalty. Despite numerous protests from other teams, the car was allowed to complete the shortened season, and it proved that it was incredibly good. The car would finish in the points in almost every single occasion, and was generally the 3rd fastest car, though it did receive a lot of competition from the McLaren MCL35. Both Perez and Stroll performed exceptionally well that season, though in the hands of Stroll the car would drop a potential victory at the Italian Grand Prix owing to a poor restart. The RP20 had a lot of hidden potential, however, as the car would pick up its first and only pole position at the Turkish Grand Prix in the hands of Lance Stroll. Though how much of that was due to his own skill and how much was due to the changeable weather conditions is up for debate. Stroll would not be able to convert his pole position into victory, though Perez would manage to pick up a second place. By this point in the season, Perez's future was at stake. He would be dropped by Racing Point and replaced by Sebastian Vettel for the next season, and he was racing for his future, putting in stunning performances left, right and centre. And all this culminated at the Sakir Grand Prix, when Checo finally picked up his long-awaited first Grand Prix victory, despite being last on track at the end of the first lap. Lance would follow him home in third place, but this great result in the penultimate round would not be enough, as Checo's car would fail in the final race and Lance would only pick up a single point. This, plus the 15-point deduction, meant that Racing Point would finish behind McLaren in fourth place, marking the end of their most successful season in Formula 1 to date. The Silverstone team would undergo yet another rebrand for the 2021 season, becoming Aston Martin Formula 1 team, bringing the British mark back to the sport after a 61-year absence. The AMR21 was just an evolution of the RP20, and it suffered a lot as a result. Its low-rake concept clashed with the rules, and it was nowhere near as fast as its original incarnation. The car struggled with pace and consistency all season long, and not just in the hands of Lance Stroll, even the seasoned hands of Sebastian Vettel could rarely bring it into the points. The car's best weekend came at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, when the chaos led to Vettel scoring an unlikely second place, the first ever podium for an Aston Martin badged car. The podium did not make the AMR21 any faster, however, and it continued to struggle for the rest of the season, and would ultimately finish only 7th place in the Constructors with 77 points. Quite a slump indeed. The initial version of the AMR22 used completely the wrong aero concept, the bulbous looking side pods proving to be ungainly and not very fast at all, the car only managing to pick up its first points at the 4th round in Imola. An upgrade for the car at the Spanish Grand Prix brought back tracing point allegations, as the car looked very similar to the leading Red Bull RB18, but these upgrades did not bring the same Red Bull pace, and the car continued to be inconsistent for the rest of the season, never finishing higher than 6th. A disillusioned Sebastian Vettel ended his final season in Formula 1 without finishing on the podium even once, the first time he had done so in his career since 2007. 55 points and 7th of the Constructors was not anything to really be proud of, but Fernando Alonso saw promise in the team, announcing that he would drive for Aston Martin in 2023 at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso seemed to have made the correct choice in career path when he joined Aston Martin for 2023. The AMR23 seemed to at least be third best on the field, potentially tied for second quickest with the Ferraris. This pace proved crucial as the car was definitely quicker, at least in the first half of the season, than the Mercedes, and Alonso would pick up several podiums for the team, with Lance Stroll not performing too badly himself, especially when you consider that he had 2 broken hands. The AMR23 would be a return to form in a way for the Aston Martin team, bringing back some of that pace that had been lost since 2020. The car would pick up 8 podiums, all at the hands of Fernando Alonso, including 3 second places at the Canadian, Monaco and Dutch Grand Prix. That second place at Monaco, however, could have potentially been a victory, had a strategy blunder not seen the team putting on the wrong tyres in a pit stop. Additional blunders would follow in the form of botched upgrades that made the car slower, and although the team did pick up 2 podiums after these upgrades, the performance of the car degraded so much that their grasp on second place in the Constructors' Championship fell further and further, until they would ultimately finish the season in a lowly 5th place. The situation wasn't helped by Lance Stroll, whose performances were increasingly inconsistent. But since his dad owns the team, it's very unlikely he's going anywhere anytime soon. Aston Martin's 2023 season is a tale of wasted potential, where the team's good start came to nothing in the end, and although 5th place is nothing to sniff at, remember that they were in 2nd at one point, and had those performances continued, they could have had their best season in Formula 1 in any guise. The Aston Martin AMR24 would still be driven by Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, and its pace was more or less a continuation of the AMR23's, at the end of the season, that is. The car may have been roughly on par with the Mercedes W15 at the start of the season, but it soon dropped off, with yet more botched upgrades seeing the car's performance degrade and become slower, with even Fernando Alonso struggling to finish inside the points. Alonso, not renowned for his patience, would often be heard on the radio complaining about the car, whilst Lance Stroll's performance went from poor to simply embarrassing as he spun the car on the formation lap of the Sao Paulo Grand Prix and then drove it into the gravel trap, beaching himself and preventing his participation in the Grand Prix. Lance's heart didn't seem to be in it for the 2024 season, and he would seldom score points, only scoring 6 times across the season, with his last points being a 10th place at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Although Aston Martin would finish 2024 in 5th place in the Constructors again, it was a far cry from their 2023 season, only managing to score 94 points to the previous year's 280. Things may be looking up for the team, however, as they will be getting a new chief designer for the 2026 season, a certain Adrian Newey. They'll also be receiving Works Honda engines from 2026 onwards. With Newey due to start working for the team in 2025, his input may help improve the AMR 25 and should be instrumental in improving the AMR 26. Though since the 2026 regulations are more of an engine formula than an aero one, his inputs may be less important than those of Honda. So at this point in time, Aston Martin's future is up in the air. It could go either way. Time will tell.